23 years. That's how long it took my daughter to erase me. Not from her memories, not from old family photographs, not even from her heart. From her story. According to the wedding program, every guest received that Saturday afternoon. Emily Brooks's father had passed away 12 years earlier. The strange part, I was standing less than 50 feet away, on my knees, pruning white roses beside the aisle where she would be married in less than 3 hours. My name is Daniel Brooks. I'm 68 years old. For 41 years, I made a living doing something most people never noticed. I built gardens. Not the fancy kind you see on magazine covers, the real ones. Community parks, church courtyards, school playgrounds, hospital, memorial gardens, where grieving families sat quietly after saying goodbye to someone they loved. People remembered weddings. People remembered. They remembered graduations. They remembered anniversaries. Very few remembered the man who planted the flowers that made those memories beautiful. I never minded flowers were never planted for applause. 3 weeks earlier, my phone rang just after sunrise. Daniel, it was Martin, a wedding planner I'd worked with for nearly 20 years. You still taking weekend jobs, only the small ones? I've got an emergency. Apparently, another landscaping company had backed out 4 days before one of the biggest weddings he'd ever organized. They need someone who can fix everything before Saturday. I thought you retired. I mostly did, but flowers don't care about retirement. He laughed. So you'll help? I looked around my quiet little house. Charlie, my golden retriever, was asleep by the back door. My calendar was empty. Send me the address. I didn't recognize the venue when I first drove through the gates. It sat on nearly 50 acres outside Asheville Old Stone Mansion, rolling gardens, a private lake reflecting the morning sun. The kind of place where weddings cost more than the house I raised my daughter in. Martin met me in the parking lot. You saved my life. I haven't done anything yet. You showed up. That's already more than the last crew. By noon, I'd already replaced dozens of dead hydrangeas, reseated 2 broken irrigation lines, rebuilt an entire flower arch that had collapsed during a thunderstorm. Hard work never scared me. What surprised me was the bride's last name. I noticed it while checking the seating chart lying on a folding table. Emily Brooks. My hands froze. Brooks. It wasn't exactly uncommon. Thousands of families carried that name. I almost laughed at myself. Imagine that. I whispered, same name. I went back to work. Around 2 o'clock, a black SUV rolled slowly onto the property, then another, then 3 more behind it. Guests had started arriving early. I stepped aside to let them pass. One by one, luxury cars filled the circular driveway, men in tailored suits, women in elegant dresses, Lotte, Champagne Camera flashes. A world that had never really been mine. I bent back over the flower bed. Roses don't bloom faster because rich people are watching. Sir? A young woman from the event staff approached me. The bride wants these white roses replaced with ivory. I smiled. Those are ivory. She blinked. They are. They'll open another shade lighter once the temperature drops. She looked embarrassed. Oh, I'll let her know. As she walked away, she muttered quietly. She's been stressed all week. Most brides are. I didn't think much of it. About 20 minutes later, I heard footsteps crunch across the gravel behind me. Quick, confident, impatient, a woman's voice. "Excuse me." I stood slowly and wiped my hands on my work apron before turning around. Time stopped. Emily, my daughter, older, more elegant, hair pinned perfectly beneath a veil, the same green eyes she'd inherited from her mother. For a heartbeat, neither of us breathed. She stared at me. I stared at her. 23 years of memories rushed through my mind all at once. Teaching her to ride a bicycle, helping with fourth-grade science projects, holding her hand at her mother's funeral, watching her leave for law school, the last Christmas card that came back unopened. Then recognition hit her focus. Her lips parted. "Day." She stopped herself. Her eyes darted around the garden, checking whether anyone had heard, whether anyone had seen. Then she stepped closer, lowered her voice almost to a whisper. "What are you doing here?" I looked down at the pruning shears in my hand. Working. She looked like she'd seen a ghost. "No. I mean, why here?" "I was hired." "By who?" "The wedding planner." She closed her eyes for one long second, almost like she was praying this conversation wasn't real. When she opened them again, the warmth was gone, replaced by panic. Real panic. She grabbed my arm gently, not affectionately, urgently. "Dad, you can't be here." Before I could answer, a man's voice echoed from the stone terrace. "Emily." She let go of my arm instantly. Her smile returned so quickly. It frightened me. "I'm coming." She looked back at me. The fear in her eyes had only grown. Then she whispered 7 words. Words no father is ever prepared to hear. "Please don't tell anyone you're my father." She turned, walked away without looking back, leaving me standing among 1,000 white roses that suddenly didn't seem beautiful anymore. I stood there long after Emily disappeared. The pruning shears were still in my hand. The roses still needed trimming. The wedding guests kept arriving. The world hadn't changed, only mine had. "Please don't tell anyone you're my father." 7 words, not shouted, not spoken with anger, spoken with fear. That somehow hurt even more. For a moment, I almost laughed, not because anything was funny, because has a strange sense of humor. You spend decades teaching your child to stand proudly beside you, only to discover they've spent years trying to make sure no one ever knows your name. "Daniel." Martin's voice pulled me back. "You all right?" I forced a smile. "Yeah." "You look pale. Just skipped breakfast." He nodded. "Finish the ceremony aisle first. The photographer wants everything perfect before guests. Sit down." "Got it." I bent back toward the flowers. Work had always been my escape. Plants didn't lie. They didn't judge. If you cared for them, they responded. People were rarely that simple. About 30 minutes later, the ceremony coordinator handed every vendor a copy of the wedding schedule. I barely glanced at it until one page caught my eye. Family, processional, mother of the bride, brother of the bride, grandparents. No father, no mention of anyone walking Emily down the aisle. Instead, one simple line: "The bride will walk alone." I stared at those words longer than I should have. Emily had dreamed about this day since she was 12. Back then, she used to wrap a white bedsheet around herself, stand on the staircase, and make me practice walking her down an imaginary aisle. "Dad, too fast." "No." Smile. "You're supposed to cry a little." I'd pretend to wipe away fake tears. She'd laugh so hard, she'd nearly fall down the stairs. I'll always pick you, she used to say. When I get married, you have to walk me. Funny how children make promises before life teaches them about pride. Just then, a black Rolls-Royce stopped near the entrance. Everyone turned, even the photographers. An older gentleman stepped out first. Tall, silver hair, perfect posture, expensive navy suit. No bodyguards, no dramatic entrance, not even a Merry Christmas. Like a man who had spent a lifetime earning respect. Instead of demanding it, people immediately straightened when they saw him. One of the planners whispered, "That's Richard Harrison." Even I recognized the name. One of the largest commercial real estate developers in North Carolina. Self-made billionaire owner of hospitals, hotels, office towers. The kind of man business magazines loved putting on their covers. So this was Ryan's father. Richard didn't head toward the mansion immediately. Instead, he stopped near the flower beds, looked around carefully, studying every detail. Most wealthy clients notice chandeliers or imported wine. Richard noticed the landscaping. Interesting. He slowly walked toward me. I stood politely. "Beautiful work," he said. "Thank you." He crouched beside one of the rose bushes, ran a finger gently across a bloom. White Eden roses. I blinked. "You know flowers?" He smiled. "My wife did. I learned enough not to embarrass myself." I couldn't help smiling back. "They're opening nicely." "They are." He stood, extended his hand. "I'm Richard." "Daniel." We shook hands. Firm and Sybil. No ego, no attempt to impress each other. Richard looked across the gardens again. "You've done this a long time. 40 years. I can tell. You don't rush plants. You understand them." That surprised me. Most people think landscaping is mowing grass. Very few understand its patience. Before I could answer, Emily appeared. "Richard." She walked over quickly, almost too quickly. The moment she saw me standing beside him, the color drained from her face. For half a second, panic flashed through her eyes again. Richard smiled warmly. "Emily, I was just complimenting this gentleman. He has remarkable hands." Emily forced a smile. "Yes, he works for the landscaping company." There was the smallest pause before she continued. "His name is Daniel, not my father. Just Daniel. A worker. Someone paid by the hour. Nothing more." Richard turned back toward me. "I hope you'll still be here after the ceremony. We're hosting dinner. The staff deserves to eat too." Before I could answer, Emily interrupted. "Oh, they usually leave before then." Her words came too fast, too rehearsed. Richard looked at her. "Usually." Then back at me. "Would you like to stay?" Emily answered before I could. "I'm sure he has other jobs." I finally spoke. "I'll stay if I'm needed." Richard smiled. "Good. I'd like that." Something shifted in Emily's expression. Not anger, fear, deep, unmistakable fear. As Richard walked toward the mansion, Emily grabbed my sleeve again, this time harder. "What are you doing?" I answered his question. You shouldn't have." I wasn't aware conversation required permission. She looked around to make sure no one could hear. "You don't understand. Then help me understand." Her eyes filled with frustration. "If Richard keeps talking to you, questions will start." "What kind of questions?" She hesitated. The answer clearly hurt to say. "Questions about us." I looked at her quietly. "There is an us, Emily." Her shoulders dropped. For the first time, she looked tired. Not cruel, just exhausted. "You think I'm ashamed of you, aren't you?" She didn't answer. Sometimes silence tells the truth faster than words. Before she could say anything else, a little girl, maybe 8 years old, ran across the lawn, chasing bubbles. She tripped, fell hard onto the stone pathway. Guests gasped without thinking. I was already moving. Old knees, slow legs, didn't matter. I reached her first. "You okay, sweetheart?" She nodded bravely, even though tears filled her eyes. I brushed the dirt from her dress, checked her scraped knee. "Nothing broken. You'll survive." She sniffled. "You promise?" "I've been fixing scraped knees for a very long time." She smiled. Her mother hurried over. "Thank you so much. It's nothing." The little girl waved at me as they walked away. I turned back. Emily had watched the whole thing. Something softened in her face. Just for a moment, then it disappeared again. She whispered, "You always did that." "What?" "You always noticed people before anyone else did." Before I could respond, someone called her name from the terrace. She took one step away. "Stop," then quietly said something that made no sense at all. "If Ryan finds out, he won't be angry because you're a gardener." She looked down. "He'll be angry because I lied." She walked away before I could ask another question. And just like that, everything changed. Because for the first time, I realized this wasn't a story about a daughter ashamed of her father. It was a story about a lie that had grown so large. She no longer knew how to escape it. For the next hour, I kept my hands busy. Stream water, steep back, look, adjust. The garden slowly became exactly what every bride dreams of: perfect. Funny thing about perfection. From a distance, it looks effortless. Up close, it's held together by thousands of tiny decisions nobody ever notices. Families aren't much different. By late afternoon, guests began taking their seats. Soft violin music drifted across the lawn. The florist made one final adjustment to the bridal arch. Photographers tested their lighting. Thing was ready. Everything except my heart. I told myself to finish the job, collect the check, go home. That would be the easiest thing to do. But life has never asked much about what's easy. I was loading empty flower trays into the truck when someone called my name. "Daniel." I turned. Richard Harrison. Agon. This time he wasn't wearing his suit jacket. His sleeves were rolled halfway up his arms. He carried 2 paper coffee cups. "I figured you might need this." He handed one to me. I accepted it. "Thank you." He looked toward the ceremony chairs. "Mind if I sit for a minute?" "There aren't many chairs for gardeners." He smiled. "Then we'll borrow 2. We sat beneath an old oak tree overlooking the lake for several minutes. Neither of us spoke. Some people aren't uncomfortable with silence. Richard seemed to be one of them. Finally, he asked, "How long have you known Emily?" The question hit harder than he intended. I looked down at my coffee. "A long time." He chuckled. "I suppose that's true if you've worked weddings around here." I almost corrected him. Instead, I simply nodded. "A very long time." Richard took a slow sip. "You know, my son talks about Emily constantly. She's brilliant, driven, kind." He smiled proudly. "She makes him a better man." I was glad to hear that. Truly, because, despite everything, a father never stops hoping someone loves his child well. Then Richard said something unexpected. "There's one thing I've never understood." I looked over. "She almost never talks about her family. Every time I ask, she changes the subject." I stayed quiet. he continued. She told us her father passed away years ago. My grip tightened around the coffee cup. There was sadness in her eyes when she said it. I believed her. He looked out across the lake. I lost my own father when I was 19, so I never asked again. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I felt my heartbeat echoing in my ears. Richard broke the silence. Funny thing is, I've always thought a man who raises someone like Emily must have been extraordinary. I looked away before he could see the moisture gathering in my eyes. Sometimes, the kindest compliments come from people who have no idea they're speaking to the person they're describing. A voice interrupted us. Mr. Harrison, one of the photographers, hurried over. We're ready for immediate family portraits. Richard stood, coming. Then he looked back at me. I hope you stay for dinner. I'd like to hear more about your work. Before leaving, he added quietly, you remind me of someone. I smiled faintly. Maybe someone who likes flowers. He laughed, maybe, and walked away. I sat there alone, coffee growing cold, thinking about one sentence. She told us her father passed away years ago. Not absent, not estranged, dead. She hadn't hidden me. She had buried me. A memory surfaced without warning. 8 years earlier, Emily had just made partner at her law firm. She invited me to celebrate. The restaurant overlooked the city skyline. Halfway through dinner, one of the senior partners walked over. He smiled. Emily, who's your guest? She answered so quickly, I almost missed it. Oh, he's an old family friend. Old family friend, not dad. At the time, I convinced myself she was nervous, trying to appear professional. I let it go. Looking back now, that wasn't the first lie. It was simply the first one I noticed. Another memory followed. Christmas. 5 years ago, I mailed her a handmade wooden jewelry box. I carved her initials into the lid myself. She never acknowledged it. 3 months later, I saw a photo online. The same jewelry box sitting on a bookshelf, except the caption read, a gift from my mentor. I stared at that picture for nearly an hour, trying to convince myself I was imagining things. I wasn't. The lies hadn't started recently. They'd been growing quietly, year after year. One small sentence at a time. The music changed. Guests stood. The ceremony was about to begin. I quietly stepped farther back into the gardens, where workers belonged, high behind rows of white roses. From there, I could see the aisle perfectly. Emily appeared. At the top of the stone staircase, she looked beautiful. Every father thinks that about his daughter on her wedding day, even the ones who aren't allowed to stand beside her. The officiant smiled. The violinists began to play. Emily took one step forward, then another, alone, just as the program had promised. But before she reached the first row of chairs, something unexpected happened. Ryan didn't smile. He didn't reach for her. Instead, he looked past her, straight toward the gardens, straight toward me. His expression changed. Confusion, recognition, then concern, as if he'd just realized someone important was missing. Or perhaps someone important had been hidden, and before the ceremony could continue, he quietly raised one hand. Wait. The music stopped. Every guest turned. The silence that followed felt louder than any wedding vow ever spoken. For one long second, nobody moved. The violinists lowered their bows. The officiant looked confused. Even the breeze seemed to disappear. Ryan was still standing at the altar. His eyes weren't on Emily anymore. They were fixed on me. Emily forced a nervous smile. "Ryan?" He didn't answer. She took another step toward him. He quietly repeated, "Just wait." The guests began whispering. What happened? Is someone sick? Did they forget the rings? Nobody knew, least of all me. Ryan stepped away from the altar, not toward Emily, toward the garden, toward where I was standing beside the rose bushes. Every pair of eyes followed him. I suddenly became painfully aware of the dirt on my work boots, the grass stains on my jeans, the pruning shears still hanging from my belt. I wasn't dressed for attention. I was dressed to disappear. When Ryan reached me, he smiled politely. "Sir." I nodded. "Congratulations." "Thank you." He hesitated, almost like he wasn't sure whether he should ask what was on his mind. Finally, he did. "I know this is going to sound strange, but have we met before?" Emily's face went completely white. I searched my memory. "I don't believe so." Ryan frowned. "I could swear I know you. I've seen your face somewhere." Emily walked over quickly, too quickly. "Ryan, the guests are waiting." He didn't even look at her. "I'm trying to remember something." Richard had also walked over now, watching quietly, not interrupting, just observing. Ryan suddenly snapped his fingers. "The scholarship dinner." I blinked. "What? 3 years ago, the Veterans Community Foundation. You donated those memorial gardens." Memory came rushing back. The foundation had asked me to redesign the healing garden outside a rehabilitation center for injured veterans. I'd refused payment. Some projects shouldn't have a price tag. I nodded slowly. "Yes." Ryan smiled. "I knew it. I met you for about 2 minutes. You refused to let them put your name on the donor plaque." I shrugged. "The garden wasn't about me." Ryan laughed softly. "I've told that story to clients for years." Emily looked completely lost. "You know each other?" Ryan looked surprised. "You never told me." She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Ryan turned back toward me. "I've admired you ever since." I almost smiled. "You admired a gardener. I admired a man who donated 6 months of work to wounded soldiers without asking for recognition." His words echoed across the silent ceremony. Several guests exchanged glances. The whispers grew louder. Emily stared at the ground. Richard looked at me with new curiosity. "You designed that memorial?" I nodded. "It wasn't just me. My crew helped." Richard smiled. "I visited that garden. My wife spent her final weeks in that hospital." I felt my chest tighten. I didn't know. He nodded slowly. "Neither did I, until today." There was another long silence. Then Ryan looked back at Emily. His expression had changed. Not angry, confused. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" Emily forced a weak laugh. "It just never came up." Ryan frowned. "It absolutely came up. I've talked about that garden dozens of times. You always changed the subject." Richard's eyes moved between both of them. He wasn't speaking, but he was listening very carefully now. Emily stepped closer. "Ryan, can we please do this later?" He looked at her for several seconds, then quietly asked the question she'd been dreading for years. "Why did you tell me your father died?" Every whisper stopped. The entire garden became silent. Even the photographers lowered their cameras. Emily looked like she couldn't breathe. She glanced toward me. For just a moment, she wasn't a successful attorney. She wasn't a bride. She wasn't the confident woman Everyone admired. She looked exactly like the frightened 16-year-old girl who used to hide behind me whenever thunderstorms shook our little house. Except this time, there was nowhere to hide. Her voice cracked. I didn't think. Ryan waited. She couldn't finish. Richard finally spoke, his voice calm, gentle. Emily, is this man your father? She closed her eyes. A single tear rolled down her cheek. Very slowly, she nodded. Yes. No excuses, no explanation. Just one honest word, yes. The whispers exploded across the audience. What? I thought he passed away. Didn't she say, oh my God? Ryan looked back at me, then at Emily, then back at me again. He wasn't angry with me. He looked heartbroken. Not because he'd discovered a poor father, because he'd discovered a painful lie. He took one slow breath, then asked the question that changed the entire wedding. Not to Emily, to me, sir. His voice was almost apologetic. Would you tell me why your daughter believed she had to erase you from her life? I looked at Emily. She was crying now, not dramatically, not loudly. Quiet tears, the kind that come when you've spent years carrying something too heavy to hold anymore. I realized something in that moment. For the first time all afternoon, nobody wanted a performance. They wanted the truth. And sometimes, the truth takes a lifetime to become simple enough to say. I took a slow breath, looked at Ryan, then at every guest sitting in those white chairs. Finally, I began with 6 words. The story isn't what you think. The story isn't what you think. No one moved. Not the guests, not the photographers, not even Emily. The only sound was the fountain behind the ceremony arch, its water spilling gently over stone, as if the world refused to stop simply because ours had. I looked at Ryan first, then Richard, then, finally, my daughter. She wasn't looking at me anymore. She couldn't. Shame has a way of making the flaw seem far more interesting than the people you've hurt. I want to make one thing clear, I said. My daughter never lied because I was a gardener. Several guests exchanged confused glances. I've never been embarrassed by what I do. I smiled faintly. I've spent 40 years helping things grow. That's a pretty good way to spend a life. Richard nodded almost imperceptibly. He understood. So no, I wasn't the problem. I paused. The problem was something much smaller. One sentence. I looked at Emily. Do you remember your first year of law school? Her shoulders stiffened. She nodded without looking up. I remember. So do I. It was orientation week. You called me one evening. You sounded excited. You'd made new friends. You were talking faster than I'd ever heard. A small smile appeared on my face. You always talked fast when you were happy. A few guests smiled. Emily didn't. You asked me something strange. I continued quietly. You said, Dad, when you come to campus this weekend, would you mind not wearing your work clothes? I laughed. I thought you were joking. So I showed up wearing exactly what I always wore. Clean jeans, work boots, a flannel shirt, the same clothes I'd worn almost every Saturday for 20 years. Emily finally whispered, Dad, but I gently shook my head. Let me finish. She fell silent again. When I arrived, you introduced me to 3 classmates. You smiled. You hugged me. Everything seemed normal. Then one of them asked, So what does your father do? You hesitated. Just for a second, and then you said. Emily's eyes squeezed shut. I quietly repeated the sentence anyway. He owns a landscape design company. I didn't correct you. I figured it wasn't worth embarrassing you over one little exaggeration. I told myself, she's young, she's trying to fit in, let it go. I looked around at the guests. That was the first brick. The wall wasn't built in one day. It was built one sentence at a time. Emily covered her face with both hands. Soft sobs escaped between her fingers. Ryan stood perfectly still, listening, not judging, just listening. Over the years, the company became larger every time someone asked. Then I became a business owner, then an entrepreneur, then a retired investor, and somewhere along the way, the real me disappeared. I smiled sadly, not because she hated me, because every new lie needed another one to protect it. Richard folded his arms thoughtfully. I've seen that happen. He wasn't speaking to anyone in particular. One lie becomes 10. Die. Then eventually, the truth becomes the hardest thing in the room. I nodded. Exactly. Ryan looked at Emily. Why didn't you just tell me? His voice wasn't angry, it was hurt. I would have loved him either way. Emily finally looked up, tears streamed freely now. I know that now. But back then, I thought successful people only respected successful families. She laughed bitterly through her tears. I spent years trying to earn acceptance from people who never asked me to pretend. The silence that followed was heartbreaking because everyone knew she was right. Nobody had forced the lie. Fear had. Richard slowly walked toward Emily. She looked terrified, expecting disappointment, maybe even rejection. Instead, he gently placed one hand on her shoulder. When I was 26, I stopped introducing my father as a janitor. Emily looked up in surprise. I told people he managed building operations. A faint smile crossed Richard's face. Sounded more impressive. I thought titles mattered. He looked across the garden. They don't. My father found out. I've never forgotten the look in his eyes. He swallowed hard. He didn't yell. He simply said, "Son, if my work embarrasses you, then I failed to teach you what work means." Richard looked down for a moment. I would give every dollar I've ever earned to apologize to him one more time. No one spoke. Several guests quietly wiped away tears. Emily stepped toward me, slowly, carefully, as though she wasn't sure she still had the right. "Dad." Her voice barely existed. "I'm so sorry." I looked into her eyes. For the first time in years, I didn't see arrogance. I didn't see pride. I saw something far more painful. A daughter realizing she hadn't lost her father, she'd been losing herself. Before I could answer, the wedding planner came running across the lawn, pale-faced and breathless. "Mr. Harrison." Richard turned. "What is it?" The florist's delivery truck just backed into the ceremony arch. Everyone instinctively turned. A loud crack echoed across the garden. The massive floral arch leaned dangerously to one side. White roses began falling onto the aisle. The structure groaned. One more shift, and the entire ceremony setup would collapse. Guests gasped. The planners froze. No one knew what to do. I quietly set my coffee cup down, rolled up my sleeves, and started walking toward the broken arch. Old habits have a way of showing people who you really are. The ceremony arch tilted another inch. Someone screamed. One of the photographers pulled his assistant backward. The florist covered her mouth with both hands. If that falls, it'll crush the front row. Wedding planners began shouting over each other. Move the chairs, get everyone back, call maintenance. Panic spreads faster than fire, especially among people who aren't used to solving problems with their own hands. I didn't run. Running makes other people panic faster. I simply walked, steady, directly toward the leaning arch. "Daniel," Martin yelled, "don't go under it." I ignored him instead. I looked at the base, not the flowers, not the decorations, the base. That's where problems always begin, whether it's a machine, a marriage, or an arch. I knelt carefully. One support stake had pulled loose after the delivery truck clipped the frame. The entire weight had shifted onto one side. Not impossible to save, but only if someone understood how the structure had been built. Luckily, I did, because I'd rebuilt it 3 days earlier. Martin, he hurried over. "Yeah, I need 6 sandbags. Now, they're behind the greenhouse." He blinked. "How did you?" "I unloaded them myself, Wednesday morning." "Go." He ran. I looked at 2 young catering servers standing nearby. Boys. They immediately stepped closer. "Yes, sir. I need both of you to hold this support exactly where it is. Don't push, don't pull. If it moves even half an inch, we start over." Both nodded instantly. Within seconds, the chaos started becoming organized, because calm is contagious too. Richard watched silently. So did Ryan. Neither interrupted. Neither tried to take over. They simply observed. Martin came back, carrying the sandbags, completely out of breath. I smiled. "Good. Now place 3 here." I pointed. "No, not beside it. Under it. Let the ground do the work." He adjusted them. The frames stopped moving. "Now hand me that steel cable." Someone from the lighting crew tossed it over. I secured it around the hidden support beam behind the flowers. Most guests couldn't even see what I was doing. They only saw the arch slowly, almost gracefully, return to perfect position. A round of spontaneous applause broke out, not because I'd fixed flowers, but because I'd restored calm. I stood up slowly. My knees protested. 68 years have a way of reminding you they're still there. I brushed dirt from my hands. "That should hold." The florist stared in disbelief. "Should?" I smiled. "It'll hold. If it doesn't, you can blame me." She laughed nervously. "I don't think that's going to happen." Richard walked over first. He examined the repaired structure, then looked at me. "You built this?" "I rebuilt it." He nodded thoughtfully. "Interesting. What is?" "You never once raised your voice." I shrugged. "Panicking doesn't fix broken things." He smiled. "No, it usually breaks more." Ryan stepped closer. "I've watched executives lose control over much smaller problems. You solved this in 5 minutes." I chuckled. 41 years. You learn a few things. Emily hadn't moved. She was still standing near the aisle, watching me. Not as the gardener, not as the father she'd hidden, for perhaps the first time in her adult life. She was seeing me simply as a man, a capable one. The officiant approached carefully. "So?" He glanced around. "Are we ready?" Everyone looked toward Richard. It was his family's event, his decision. Richard looked at the repaired arch, then at me, then at the waiting guests. He smiled. "No." Everyone froze. "No." Richard slowly walked toward the center of the aisle. He picked up the wireless microphone, tapped it once. The speakers crackled softly across the gardens. "I think, before this wedding continues, There's something much more important we need to do. Emily's eyes widened. Ryan looked confused. I had no idea where this was going. Neither did anyone else. Richard turned toward the guests, his voice calm, steady. I've spent 40 years building companies. I've hired thousands of people, and I've learned something. He paused. The easiest way to judge a person's character is to watch what they do when something breaks. He looked directly at me. This gentleman never asked who was paying. He never asked whose fault it was. He simply stepped forward and fixed it. He smiled warmly. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to properly meet Daniel Brooks. The applause started politely, then grew louder, much louder. Guests stood, one after another. Within seconds, the entire garden was on its feet. A standing ovation, not for a millionaire, not for a celebrity, for a man with dirt still on his hands. I looked down instinctively. I've never been comfortable with attention, especially attention I didn't ask for. When I looked back up, Emily was crying again. But these tears were different. She wasn't crying because she'd been exposed. She was crying because, for the first time in years, the room was honoring the man she'd spent so long trying to hide. And then, Richard said the one sentence that changed the wedding forever. He looked at the guests, then at Emily, then back at me. I believe this wedding has begun with the wrong man standing at the front. The applause stopped instantly. Every head turned toward Richard. No one knew what he meant, not even Ryan. The applause faded. No one spoke. Richard still held the microphone. He looked toward the officiant, then toward Ryan, finally toward Emily. I've attended more weddings than I can count. He smiled softly. I've seen expensive flowers, luxury venues, designer dresses. I've even seen fireworks. But do you know what I've never understood? He paused. A bride walking toward a new family while pretending she doesn't have one. The words landed gently, but they hit like thunder. Emily covered her mouth. Her shoulders shook. She wasn't crying because she felt embarrassed anymore. She was crying because someone had finally said out loud the truth she'd been running from for years. Richard slowly walked toward me. Every guest watched. Every camera followed him. He stopped just inches away. Then, to everyone's surprise, he extended his hand, not as a billionaire, not as the host, simply as one father to another. Daniel. I shook his hand. I owe you an apology. I frowned. For what? He smiled sadly. For believing a story without ever asking the man living it. He turned back toward the guests. I've built my career by verifying facts, but today, I accepted one sentence without question. He passed away. Richard looked down briefly. I should have asked. I didn't that. I'm sorry. I felt something tighten in my chest. Very few people apologize publicly. Even fewer wealthy men do. Ryan stepped forward. His eyes never left mine. I owe you one too. You welcomed me into your daughter's life without even knowing who I was. I looked confused. What do you mean? He smiled. The veteran's garden. I found out later that the anonymous donor had personally paid for the rehabilitation center's children's playground, too. I chuckled quietly. They were already building the hospital. It didn't seem right for injured soldiers to watch their grandchildren play on broken equipment. Ryan stared at me. You never told anyone. There wasn't anything to tell. A murmur spread through the guests. People were beginning to understand something. The quiet gardener, standing beside the roses, had spent his entire life helping people without asking for recognition. Emily suddenly took a shaky step forward, then another, until she stood directly in front of me. She looked exactly the way she had after scraping her knees as a little girl, scared, ashamed, hoping her father would still be there. Her voice barely existed. "Dad, I'm so tired." Those 4 words broke my heart more than any apology could have. Not "I'm sorry," not "I was wrong," just "I'm so tired." Because lies are exhausting. I gently placed my hands over hers. "I know." She looked up. "I don't want to pretend anymore. I know. I don't even know who I became. I know." Fresh tears rolled down her face. "You always know." I smiled. "That's part of the job." She laughed through her tears. A tiny laugh. The kind fathers spend years hoping to hear again. Then she whispered the words she'd wanted to say since she first saw me among the roses. "I was never ashamed of you." I stayed silent. She continued. "I was ashamed of needing people to think I came from someone different. I confused success with worth." She looked around at the guests, and somewhere along the way, I forgot who taught me what real success actually looks like. No one interrupted. No one checked their phones. No one checked their phones. Even the children had stopped fidgeting, because every person there understood. This was no longer a wedding. It was a daughter finding her way home. Emily reached into the small satin purse hanging from her wrist. She pulled out the folded ceremony program, the one every guest had received, the one that said, "Father, deceased." She stared at it for several seconds, then quietly tore it in half. The pieces floated gently onto the white rose petals below. She looked at the officiant. "I'm sorry." Her voice was stronger now. "We need new programs." The officiant blinked. "We don't have time." Emily smiled through her tears. "We don't need them." She turned toward every guest, raised her voice just enough for everyone to hear. "I'd like to make one correction." She walked over to me, slipped her arm through mine, then looked proudly across the garden. "My name is Emily Brooks, and this," she squeezed my arm, "is my father." For a moment, no one breathed. Then applause erupted again, louder than before. Not because of the announcement, because she finally said it. Without fear, Ryan quietly walked over. He smiled at me, then at Emily. "I think," he looked toward the officiant, "we've been waiting for the wrong entrance." He stepped away from the aisle, held out his hand toward me. "Daniel, I have a favor to ask." "What is it?" He smiled. "Would you do me the honor of walking your daughter down the aisle?" Emily looked at me. Hope, fear, love, regret, all of it lived in her eyes at once. I remembered the little girl wrapped in a white bedsheet, standing on our staircase. "Dad, don't forget. You have to walk me." I smiled. I remember very gently. I kissed her forehead, the same way I had before her first day of kindergarten, before college, before every important moment in her life. Some traditions should never disappear. I looked at the officiant. "I believe we're finally ready." As the violin began playing again, Emily tightened her grip on my arm, then whispered something only I could hear. "Dad, if Mom were here today, do you think she'd forgive me?" I looked ahead, took the first step toward the aisle, and answered with complete honesty. "I think she'd tell you the same thing I always have. It's never too late to come home. The music began again. This time, no one was watching the flowers. No one was admiring the mansion. No one cared about the expensive decorations. Every eye was on a father walking beside the daughter who had finally found the courage to stop pretending. Emily held my arm tighter than she ever had when she was little. Halfway down the aisle, she quietly laughed through her tears. You know, I practiced this walk hundreds of times. So did I. She looked at me. You did. I smiled. Every time you wrapped yourself in one of your mother's bed sheets and called it a wedding dress. She laughed. I looked ridiculous. You looked happy, and that's all I ever wanted. When we reached the altar, Ryan stepped forward. Instead of immediately taking Emily's hand, he turned toward me without saying a word. He wrapped me in a hug. A real one, firm, respectful, the kind that doesn't need an audience. Quietly, he whispered, I promise I'll never make her feel like she has to earn love. I swallowed the lump in my throat. That's all a father ever wants to hear. The ceremony itself was simple. No dramatic speeches, no perfect movie moments, just honest vows. And somehow, those are always the strongest ones. When the officiant asked if I wished to say a few words before the reception, Richard slowly stood again. The guests smiled. Most assumed another toast was coming. Instead, he walked toward the edge of the dance floor, picked up a silver tray from one of the waiters. On it were dozens of expensive place cards, each one printed with guests' names and seating assignments. He looked around the room, then quietly said, I've changed my mind. Everyone looked confused. He handed the tray back. No assigned seating tonight. The wedding planner looked horrified. But the seating chart, Richard smiled. Throw it away. No one moved. He continued. Too often, we spend our lives deciding who belongs at which table. The important people, the successful people, the wealthy people. He looked toward me. I've learned something today. The best people rarely choose the best seats. They choose the people. Then he did something no one expected. He walked over to my table, pulled out the chair beside mine, and sat down, not at the head table, not beside politicians, not beside investors, beside the gardener. The room fell silent. A few seconds later, Ryan carried his own plate over, sat beside Emily, then beside me. One by one, guests began moving too. Doctors, teachers, business owners, military veterans, neighbors, strangers. Within minutes, the carefully planned seating chart no longer existed. People weren't sitting by status anymore. They were sitting with whoever made them feel welcome. Martin leaned over and whispered, I've organized weddings for 23 years. I've never seen anything like this. I smiled. Neither have I. Dinner was loud. Children ran across the lawn. Grandparents told stories. Someone convinced the string quartet to play old country songs. Even the waiters laughed for the first time that day. It stopped feeling like an event. It started feeling like a family later that evening. Emily found me standing alone near the gardens. The sun was beginning to disappear behind the hills. Golden light rested gently across the roses we'd planted. She stood beside me. Neither of us spoke for a while. Finally, she said, I almost fired the landscaping company. I laughed softly. I know, I saw the email draft. I looked surprised. You did? She nodded. Martin accidentally left his laptop open. I saw my own name on the request. Replace the old gardener before guests arrive. She covered her face. I didn't know it was you. She couldn't finish. I gently touched her shoulder. You don't have to explain anymore. You've already told the truth. She looked up. Does that make everything okay? I thought about that for a moment. No. She looked down. But it makes healing possible. The evening slowly came to an end. Guests began leaving. Cars disappeared, one by one. Through the front gates, Charlie, who had spent the afternoon charming half the wedding guests into feeding him scraps, wandered over and rested his head against my leg. Emily smiled. He still remembers me. He never forgot, she whispered. I wish people loved that easily. I scratched behind Charlie's ears. They can. They just have to stop keeping score. Before leaving for their honeymoon, Emily walked back one last time. She handed me a small envelope. Open it tomorrow, not tonight. I nodded. I promise. She hugged me longer this time. No fear, no shame, no audience. Just a daughter hugging her father. As she walked toward the car, she suddenly turned around. Oh, I almost forgot. What? She smiled. The hospital called. What hospital? The Veterans Rehabilitation Center. They're naming the healing garden. I frowned. I told them not to. I know. They ignored you. I sighed dramatically. Stubborn people. She laughed. I wonder where they learned that. The next morning, I sat on my back porch with a cup of coffee, Charlie asleep beside my chair, birds singing. The world wonderfully ordinary again. I opened Emily's envelope. Inside was a single photograph. It had been taken the moment we started walking down the aisle. She wasn't looking at the guests. She wasn't looking at Ryan. She wasn't looking at Ryan. She was looking at me, smiling the same smile she wore when she was 6 years old. On the back, she had written one sentence. Thank you for waiting at the end of every road until I finally found my way back home. Love, your daughter. I sat there for a long time, looking at that picture, thinking about gardens. People always admire flowers. But flowers aren't really the miracle. The miracle is that someone believed in a seed long before anyone else could see what it might become. Maybe that's what being a parent is. You keep planting love, even when the seasons change, even when storms come, even when the person you planted it for forgets where they came from. Because one day, if you're lucky, they find their way back. And when they do, you don't ask why they got lost. You simply open the gate. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to hit the like button. It helps these stories reach more people who need them. And tell me in the comments, do you think Emily deserved a second chance? I read your comments because some of the most powerful stories come from real life. If you enjoy heartfelt family stories about forgiveness, dignity, and second chances, subscribe and join us for the next journey. Until then, take care of the people who stood beside you before the world knew your name.